You're listening to episode 77 of Liz's Healthy Table.
Looking for a healthy new way to feed your family without the hassle and hype? Welcome to Liz's Healthy Table, where your host, registered dietitian nutritionist Liz Weiss, serves up fresh and flavorful recipes with a tasty side of science, good nutrition, and fun. Are you and your family ready for some wholesome food that tastes great too? Don't change that dial. Your food adventure starts here.
Welcome to the podcast, everyone. On this week's show, we've got an episode all about beans. Humble beans. They're versatile, healthy, hearty, and whether you prefer the convenience of canned beans, like I do, or you enjoy making them from scratch, it's all good because the results are so many delicious recipes you can whip up quickly and serve to your family happily. So joining me on this week's show to talk about my favorite legume is Joe Yonan. He is the food and dining editor of the Washington Post, and he's the author of the awesome, fairly new cookbook, Cool Beans, the ultimate guide to cooking with the world's most versatile plant-based protein with 125 recipes. So on the show, we're actually going to talk about a few of those recipes, including Joe's recipe for Harissa roasted carrots and white bean dip. Super yummy, very easy. And we're also going to talk about Julia's deep dark chocolate mousse made with aquafaba. And if you don't know what aquafaba is, it's the liquid from canned chickpeas. And it does magical things in recipes. So you'll hear about that later on in the show. And by the way, if you head on over to Liz's Healthy Table, to my blog, you'll find the complete recipe for the Harissa roasted carrots and white bean dip. Really delish. You'll love that one. So I recorded this show actually back in April when we were in the throes of the pandemic. And here in Massachusetts, we are still dealing with it. You know, we're just kind of moving slowly into phase 2. Our state has opened up slowly. So we're kind of, we're still dealing with it. This week, as I'm recording this introduction, our country is dealing with another crisis, which is the death of George Floyd. So I just want all of you guys to know that, here in my little corner of the podcasting and nutrition world, I am listening, I'm learning, and I'm taking action. So when I think about racism, I think about social injustice. We all deserve equal treatment under the law and equal access to things like education and healthcare, nutritious and affordable food, a clean environment, and certainly easy access to the vote. Voting should be easy. But these equalities are not happening. So this week, I decided that I would put my energy into politics. And no, I'm not running for office. I would be a horrible politician, but I am determined to make a difference in who we elect to our state, local, and national government, because I really believe that our elected officials should reflect our values. So what am I doing? Well, this month, I'm taking part in a 4-part training program to learn how to be a political organizer. Sounds fancy. So basically, I want to help people get out to the polls to support candidates dedicated to social justice. I'm a big believer that positive change can only take place when it comes from the bottom up and the top down. So I hope I can make a small difference by leaning in and getting involved. And by the way, if you're not registered to vote, look into it. And this is, by the way, no matter your political party, this is not about that. This is about empowering people to vote, because when we vote, our collective voices are heard. Okay, back to the podcast. If you love the show, tell a friend about it. Write a review on iTunes or Stitcher Radio, wherever you get your podcasts. And be sure to check out the Liz's Healthy Table blog for Joe's bean dip recipe. And of course, the show notes from today's episode for links to resources and all the cool ways you can follow Joe Yonan. If you're a fan of beans, let's get cooking with Joe Yonan. Hey, Joe, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks so much for having me, Liz.
So I know I met you years ago. I'm racking my brain. You probably don't remember. I can't remember, but I know I did. I just want to let you know I have met you before.
I bet was it at IACP conference, perhaps?
Maybe. You know
Yeah.
what? Maybe that was it. Do you remember?
You are definitely familiar to me, both the name and the face. So I agree that I think that we met. And, I meet a lot of people at IACP. So if you're a member and you've gone to conference, I bet that's what it is. I bet that's what it is.
Thank you for solving the mystery. Now I can sleep at night. Phew.
Okay, good.
What a relief.
Because I can't. So.
Oh, really?
No, I'm exaggerating.
Bet you have a lot on your mind.
Yeah, we all do, right?
Yeah, we do. It's just like a crazy time. And so before we talk about crazy times, just tell everybody a little bit about yourself, where you work, what you do. I know you're probably working from your house now, but what do you do? And just let's talk about, we'll get more to Cool Beans later, but I know you've written other books too. So just give us the little backstory.
Sure. I am the food and dining editor at the Washington Post, which means that I supervise all of the food coverage in the features department. And I have a great staff, and we do recipes, and we do restaurants, and we do trends, and we do a lot of stuff all over the feature sections of the paper, and sometimes the news sections too, sometimes A1. And I also write cookbooks here and there. It takes me usually a few years to write one because of my busy job, but my latest one is called Cool Beans, and it's a celebration of what I call the world's most versatile plant-based protein. And I've written other books. My last couple of books were aimed at single cooks, people who are cooking for themselves, feeding themselves, living alone. And those were called Eat Your Vegetables was the last one, and the one before that was called Serve Yourself. And I've edited books. I edited a really fun survey kind of anthology book with chefs and food personalities from all over the country called America, the Great Cookbook. A few years ago, it was a benefit for the charity No Kid Hungry. And that was really an ambitious, fun project. And I long ago co-wrote a book called The Fearless Chef with chef in Boston, Andy Husbands.
I know Andy Husbands.
Oh, yeah, he's great.
Yeah, because I'm in the Boston area. So
yeah,
obviously
he's great.
I know him. Wow. And do you have a culinary, I'm sure you do, but what's your culinary background that got you to where you are today?
Well, I've always cooked. I think my interest was really set in motion when I was a kid, when my parents got divorced. My father was in the Air Force, and when my mother divorced him, she lost privileges to shop at the discount Air Force Base commissary, this discount grocery. And it was really important to her to be able to shop there. It was so much cheaper. And she was a single mom raising several kids, but she realized there was a loophole that her kids did not lose privileges. So she started taking me every Saturday with a list and cash, and she dropped me off, and she waited in the parking lot. And if I got everything on the list and came in under budget, I could buy something for myself. So I was 8 years old when this started, and it was great. And so pretty soon I started, of course, becoming fascinated by what was happening to the food once it got back to the house. And I had, learned to comparison shop and compare different brands. And so I certainly wanted to taste them. And I was a little obsessed with my mother's equipment. So some of my cooking interest began because I really wanted to use her stand mixer, either to whip the cream or mash the potatoes, and especially around holiday time. And then I just went from there. I always cooked for myself growing up and in college, putting myself through college and as a young professional. But I worked in newspapers. I've worked in newspapers since I was 15. So I've always been a journalist. And in 1999, I sort of had a little bit of a career crisis. I wasn't happy with the direction I was going in. I was very news focused at the time at the Boston Globe. And I decided to go to culinary school in my non-existent spare time. I was working nights on the Boston Globe's coffee desk, a 4:30 to 12:30 shift. And I went to culinary school in Porter Square at Cambridge School of Culinary Arts.
So did I.
Oh, you did? Oh, how great.
Oh, wait, what year were you there?
I was there 99, 2000.
Oh my gosh. I was there 97, 98.
We just missed each other.
And I actually was pregnant, like towards the end of it, I was pregnant, and just that deep fat fryer, the smell of that thing. I just could not wait to get out of there. That is so funny. Oh my gosh. We have like so many 1 degrees of separation here.
Yes, we do. CSCA.
Yeah.
That's it.
Oh my gosh. Roberta. Yeah. Unbelievable.
The late Roberta Dowling.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. I can't believe this. Okay. So you go to Cambridge School of Culinary Arts, and then what?
And then I just tried to marry my two career loves. So bring food into my journalism rather than I had some fleeting thoughts about giving it all up and going into restaurants, but I didn't really want to pay my dues all over again. I was 30 at the time. And so I really just wanted to move into food journalism. So I started writing about food as much as I could for the Globe, and then pretty much started trying to make myself indispensable, doing all sorts of things there, and then threatening to leave unless they let me write about food. So, and that worked. Eventually, it took a couple rounds. So I wrote about food for the Globe for a few years, and then I came to the Post in 2006 to edit the food section.
Wow. Cool stuff.
Yeah.
Cool beans. So you have, I'm sure, an office under normal times. And I assume you're just at home now cooking and editing and just kind of doing your thing and Zooming and doing what we're all doing.
That's exactly right. Yeah. Directing my team, editing, checking in on everybody, trying to both pivot in terms of how we shoot food. You know, we had to change our system for testing recipes and shooting food because we couldn't all be together. We certainly couldn't, we couldn't be post-test kitchen, and also, direct the coverage of the terrible, crisis that's happening in the American restaurant industry right now.
Yeah. Cause you've got this restaurant review section, which obviously you've had to pivot away from, but I'm sure you're talking about what restaurants are doing now to feed people, whether those are people in need or people who just want takeout. How's that all going?
That's right. Yeah. So my main food critic, Tom Sietsema, has pivoted to delivery and takeout meals, writing about them. I wouldn't say criticizing them as much now, right? It's, it's spotlighting good things that are happening. We're not giving stars.
Right.
We were supposed to be in the middle of producing and finalizing our spring dining guide right now. It was slated to come out May 3rd, and we had set up, a really wonderful cover shoot where we were spotlighting all of these new faces on the DC dining scene, and so many of them people of color, young people of color, which is really an exciting thing to be able to spotlight. And of course, we had to just scrap it all and push it all off. And so that's been really disappointing to people and difficult. But yeah, we're also covering just this ever-changing story every day as restaurants pivot to their own strategies. To some of them, unable to do that. They're all filing for help in this PPP program, and they're, organizing like they never have before. And they're, trying to help each other. There's some wonderful charities that are aimed at displaced restaurant workers. And of course, they're also, chefs are some of the most charity-minded people that I know. And so they're also just making all these meals for needy people. Jose Andres is here in DC.
Sure. I was going to ask about him. He's just amazing. Anytime I want to give money to a charity, that's always like my go-to. It's World Central Kitchen and then Mazon, the Jewish Response to Hunger. So those are like the two organizations when it comes to feeding people who are, dealing with food insecurity. That's kind of my go-to. So I'll give those a shout out. But yeah, Jose Andres, who hails from DC, is just amazing.
Yeah. And his nonprofit, World Central Kitchen, is operating out of Nats Park, because of course baseball is over. And he's putting out, I think, is it about 10,000 meals a day out of Nats Park for needy people. So yeah, it's a pretty incredible operation. So we're writing about things like that. And then of course, what people can cook at home with a limited pantry, with limited trips to the grocery store, with maybe limited expertise. A lot of people are finding out that a lot of people are realizing that they forgot to learn how to cook. So now they really need to. So they're looking to us for a lot of that information. We started a destination a couple of years ago now called Voraciously, which is a website that's part of the post that is aimed at less experienced cooks. So more intimidated, less experienced cooks, which has been really fascinating. It's been a huge hit.
So you're seeing an uptick then. People are coming over to Voraciously.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Nice. I like that.
They've really been hungry, so to speak, for all of the how-tos and simple recipes and guidance that we've been giving them.
Yeah, it is unbelievable. Like the recipes I'm creating for my blog are really based, and I actually did a cooking demo. I was telling Joe before we got on the call to my listeners, I did a cooking class via Zoom this morning, and it's all about what's coming out of the pantry and how you can kind of shake things up. So if you don't have cannellini beans, use chickpeas, or if you don't have a can of tomato sauce, maybe you have one of those aseptic boxes, they look like juice boxes with tomato sauce. So, or use crushed tomatoes or whatever. So you have to be flexible.
Flexibility is the name of the game. It really always has been if you're a smart, efficient cook. As you and I know, Liz, I mean, it doesn't make any sense to fall in love with, some recipe that you read at 5 o'clock and think that, that this is in the before days, right? When we were all going to our offices, to fall in love with some recipe that you read at 5 o'clock and to realize that you don't have any of the ingredients or many of the ingredients and think that you're just going to be able to stop at the supermarket on your way home to get them and get dinner on the table at a reasonable hour. No.
Not working anymore. Mm-mm.
If you don't know what you're going to cook for dinner, by 5 o'clock and you're thinking about, just now getting the ingredients, I think you're kind of screwed. But, and now, of course, people, it's just so much more obvious to people now, but it always has been true.
You got to plan, right? You got to plan. Yeah, absolutely. And I think the silver lining, because I'm all about silver linings, the silver lining I see too. One is people are learning to cook, like going to YouTube or going to different websites and saying, okay, I'm going to watch that tutorial, or I'm going to maybe even take a master class and just really learn more cooking skills. And number two is family dinners. We're back to family dinners every night by default. And I love that. I'm a big family dinners person. So just gathering everybody. And I've got my 21-year-old home. And as I've talked about it on the podcast, he's been helping me cook and getting into the kitchen because, they get a little bored. It's like, hey, come on in and cook with me. It's been nice.
Yeah, absolutely. That's great.
So beans, your book comes out, Cool Beans. And I actually had watched a Facebook Live you did with my friend Ellie Krieger, and Ellie works with you. She actually was my intern at CNN back in the day.
Wow.
So we go way back. And so she's a good pal. And so I watched this interview she does with you and cooking demo. I'm like, oh my gosh, I have to have Joe on the show because I love beans. And then boom, this pandemic happens and beans could not be that is the go-to pantry ingredient that everybody has right now is beans.
Right.
So your timing, even though it's bad in a way, it's good in a way. I mean, we need your book. So tell me about Cool Beans.
Well, I have been working on it for several years, and I just had this sense that, I've been fascinated by beans for so many years. I'm a vegetarian, and I have been for, I guess it's been official for 8 years now. And so for vegetarian, beans are just so important, right? I mean, they're really incredibly nutritious. They've got all that fiber, which is so important to our gut health, as you know. They have all those minerals and vitamins. They're fairly low in calories, and they are shelf stable. So you can have them in your pantry in either canned or dried form, and you can have access to them anytime you want. And I honestly can't think of another shelf-stable food that is so versatile and delicious as beans. And nutritious. Nuts and seeds are really good for you, and grains. But I don't think you can do nearly as many things with either of those categories of food as you can do with beans.
Yeah, they're so versatile. And in a few minutes on the podcast, we are going to talk about your recipe for Harissa roasted carrot and white bean dip recipe. Great. I hope you have the book open because I have an online version of it because obviously mailing things to people, it's not as easy as it used to be. But let's talk about that recipe in a few minutes because I loved it.
Great.
But, while we're talking about nutrition, I just wanted to point out that you in the book talk about blue zones. I'm fascinated. So the blue zones are these zones in the world where people live to be really old. So they have these hyper healthy diets. And it seems like you tell us that beans are part of the diet in all of these different blue zones across the globe, no matter where. Could be Asia, could be Costa Rica. So tell us about the blue zones.
I just find them so fascinating. There are these pockets around the world where the population not only lives much longer than average, but is also distinct and isolated enough that they can be studied. So, there's an island, Ikaria in Greece, and there's Okinawa, Japan, and there's Seventh-day Adventists in the United States are a few of them. And when there's been all this research done on them from the folks who, like Dan Buettner is the main researcher who's studied them. And, their community habits, their social habits have some commonalities, which are fascinating. They all seem to have some kind of regular intergenerational contact. They all have strong, really tight social circles. They all get really incidental exercise. So it's not that they, run or work out or do yoga or anything like that necessarily. They just live lives where, like, I think it's Greece, where the women all go up the hill every day to forage for these wild greens and walk down the hill. So they're walking up and down this hill every day. Right. And in Okinawa, Japan, they all sleep on the floor. So they're always getting up and down off of the floor, which is really good for you. But when it comes to diet, they're not all vegetarians. The Seventh-day Adventists are. They're not all vegetarians, but they all eat a predominantly plant-based diet. If they eat anything else, any animal products, they tend to be a modest amount of seafood. And the one food that they all have in common are beans. And I heard Dan on an interview several years ago, and he was asked, what can we do, Americans who live this, sedentary lifestyle? What are some of the things that we can do to live longer based on the information that you've gotten from these communities? And he said, when it comes to food, eat more beans. So I thought that was pretty amazing. I was starting to think about this book project, and I just sort of fell in love with that idea that, eat beans, live longer. Right.
Mm-hmm. Right. It's easy. It's inexpensive.
Oh, they're so cheap. Right. That's the other thing that's so beautiful about beans is just that affordability.
Right.
Which is so important now, too, when people are in really uncertain economic situations so often.
Indeed. And, for me, because I'm a cook who loves convenience, I tend to gravitate to the canned beans.
Yeah.
I know other people will buy the beans dried and then they will soak them, they'll hydrate them, and then they'll cook them. But beans, obviously in a can, super convenient. But
Absolutely.
Beans that you're going to cook from scratch, what's the benefit? What do you see as they're both inexpensive, let's face it, right? But what do you see as the benefit, say culinary benefit, of buying those dried beans and then soaking them and cooking them? What's the culinary benefit there?
Right. Well, first, let me say that they are both inexpensive, but nothing is as cheap as dried beans. It's just shocking how cheap they are per serving, right?
Right.
But culinarily, I would say two of the main benefits from dried beans are you can have access to a lot of different kinds of beans a lot of different varieties that you won't necessarily easily find canned. And that's one of them.
Give me a few examples.
Well, in New England, Jacob's Cattle is a fabulous popular bean that I've never seen canned.
Nor have I, but I've seen it in restaurants.
I would love that. I would love it if I could get canned Jacob's Cattle bean. It's a fabulous bean. A Borlotti bean, you might see it canned in a really good Italian market, but not usually. And it's also called the cranberry bean. That's a fabulous bean that you don't typically see canned. And then there's all sorts of varieties, like Christmas lima is an incredible bean. It's a huge lima bean that has these really gorgeous colorings. It's called the chestnut bean in Italy because it actually has a little bit of a chestnut flavor. It's an incredible bean. I never see that in a can. Black chickpea is an incredible, really interesting, unique bean. And it makes the most striking hummus, as you might imagine. And it's not available in cans. It's actually not even that easy to find dried, but it's worth it if you find it to grab it because it's so interesting.
And where would you find it, though? Would you have to look online, or would you have to go to Whole Foods, or even more, say, upscale than Whole Foods?
Yeah, black chickpea, you can find it Under normal circumstances, you would be able to sometimes find them in Indian markets because it's popular in India. But I also really love this company in the Midwest called Timeless Natural Foods that specializes in lentils, and they sell their lentils and beans in stores and some online, and they sell black chickpeas that are wonderful. I just got some in the other day, so I've been thinking about them. So that's one benefit, is that you have access to all these varieties that you wouldn't normally have access to. I do think that I think that the texture of canned beans is actually really good. Sometimes I hear people say, oh, I just hate canned beans because they're mushy. And for the most part, I don't really find that that's true with most canned beans that I buy, with good brands of canned beans. But when you cook a bean from scratch, you can get it as creamy, and know how to cook it. You can get it as creamy and tender as you want it. You have a little bit more control. And then the other thing, which is possibly the most important, is that when you cook beans from dried, you really end up with two fabulous products. You've got this beautifully cooked bean itself, and you've got what I call the liquid gold, which is the cooking liquid from the bean. It's the most beautiful pot liquor you can imagine. And you can sip it like a soup, and you can add it to sauces, and you can store the beans in this liquid, and they just stay so flavorful when you do. You can refrigerate or freeze them in the liquid. I also find that the beans that I store in the liquid seem to last longer in the fridge than if they were just dry. Or they're cooked, but if I didn't put them in that liquid, they don't seem to last as long. They seem to go bad sooner in the fridge. So it also seems to protect them. And then they just continue soaking up that flavor when they're sitting in that liquid.
Mm. And in the book, you do give a guide, because I know there's, different tips. Like some people will say salt the water, don't salt the water, soak the beans, and then, drain and rinse, and then add fresh water. Like, so is there any right or wrong? I mean, we could probably talk all day about it, but in the book, you sort of outline for people the best way to cook different beans.
Yeah, you're right that we could talk about it all day. We could talk about the soaking or not soaking question all day. And I sort of come down on a fairly simplified way of cooking beans. I don't usually soak beans. I know there's a lot of reasons why you might want to. There's certainly some nutrition benefits. You can cut down on the gas producing qualities of beans, but nothing is as flavorful to me as a pot of beans that I did not soak and that I salted from the beginning. The liquid just has more flavor, and certainly salting them at the beginning also helps with the flavor. There's this old way of thinking that if you put any salt in at the beginning, that it makes the beans too tough and hard to soften. But if you're going to soak, I like to soak beans in a salt brine, and it actually softens the exterior. But I also like to use kombu.
So what's kombu? Tell everybody.
So kombu is dried seaweed. It's a type of kelp. And my sister always taught me to cook beans with kombu. I think it's something that she always did from her macrobiotic days in the 60s and 70s.
I remember those days, yeah.
Yeah, and I never really knew why until I started looking at it for researching this book. I always really liked the way the beans turned out when the kombu was in there. It just seemed to help soften them and improve their texture. And it turns out that there are enzymes in the kombu that help with the digestibility. They reduce those gaseous effects. So the enzymes in kombu that help with these gas-producing effects of beans are actually the same enzymes that we lack, that we need to digest the oligosaccharides in beans that cause flatulence. And then there's been research that's shown that the kombu actually helps soften the beans as much as soaking does. So it's kind of incredible.
Yeah. And kombu, it's not that hard to find either, right? You can find that. Yeah.
No, people have been asking me certainly during the pandemic about, can they substitute something else, or can they just leave the kombu out? And you can absolutely make beans without kombu. So if you can't find it, just continue on and you'll be fine. But if you can get your hands on, buy a bunch of it, because it really will help make your beans that much better and easier to cook.
Good. I love that. A nice little bean cooking hack.
Yep.
So maybe this is an unfair question, but I am curious if, and maybe it depends on the season, but do you have a favorite recipe in cool beans right now?
Oh, they're all my children, Liz. They're all my little babies. But yeah, no, there are some things that have sort of come to the top. Things that I go back to time and time again, and that I suggest other people try, especially if they're new to making beans. And one of the ones that I like to talk about that I just fell in love with the first time I had it and continue to really love it is a recipe that I call Lalo's cacahuate beans. And it's a recipe that I got in Mexico City. I was on my honeymoon, and my husband and I were at this restaurant that has an incredible chef, Eduardo Garcia, and he's known, as a lot of chefs in Mexico are, for his way with beans. And these beans that he served us, they were so deeply flavored and yet so seemingly simple that I was fascinated by them. And it turns out that it's a very easy recipe to make. Cacahuate bean is the same thing as a cranberry bean, it turns out. And cacahuate means peanut, which is a reference to the way the beans look when they're dried. But when you cook them the way Lalo, which is the nickname for Eduardo, the way Lalo asks you to cook them, it's pretty surprising. You cook them first very simply, very gently, with just a little garlic. And once they're tender, you make a sofrito, the aromatic vegetables, onion, tomato, chilies that are so beloved in Mexican cooking. And you add that and you crank up the heat to high and you vigorously boil the beans for a full half an hour. And the first time that I made it, when I saw the recipe, I thought, oh, I don't know about this. I don't know. Is this right? I mean, I've spent, this time kind of gently cooking these beans so that they, aren't going to fall apart and they're going to be swelled and beautiful and tender. And now I'm going to full on boil them for a half an hour. And of course, whenever you're trying a new recipe, especially by somebody as, talented as Eduardo Garcia, you say to yourself, well, I'm going to try it his way first and see. And I did it, and it's truly incredible. I mean, boiling, what it does is it, of course, reduces the liquid and concentrates the cooking liquid, but it also infuses the beans with those aromatic vegetables in a way that you really can't when they go in there from the very outset. So it's incredible. It's very, very easy and delicious. And it can be made with other types of beans. I call for the cranberry bean with that, which is also the borlotti, but it would be fabulous with and I've done it with just good old pinto beans.
Mm-hmm. Good to know. All right. So the book has different sections, like many cookbooks do. You have dips and snacks, and you have salads and soups, stews, main dishes. You have desserts.
Yep.
Which I know we're going to get to, but because I have a black bean brownie recipe on my blog, which is a recipe I do love.
Yeah.
But before we get into desserts, because I did sort of tease it earlier, can you just tell everybody about your Harissa roasted carrot and white bean dip? And I will tell you that I made it probably week 2 into quarantine. And I was already getting sick of, full on dinners every night. And so I created this beautiful snack board with the dip that I made and veggies and chips and you name it, probably some olives on there. I'd have to look back at the photo. And that was dinner. And sometimes I love to do a snack board for dinner. So I will tell everybody listening, make this recipe and then build a snack board, and I'll share it on the blog. But can you talk everybody through, because it's super simple, the ingredients you need and how you do it?
Yeah, it's really easy. First of all, I have to say I love that idea of a snack board. I mean, it's such a fun way to eat, right? It makes it feel so much more informal and communal and like a little party. So I love that you did that. This recipe, really, it's so simple. You just toss carrots with harissa, a tablespoon of harissa, which is the North African chili paste. And, if you didn't have harissa, you could absolutely do this with chipotle. The chipotles in adobo, I think, would be really delicious with this. You could even use, some sriracha. you really just want something a little fiery. There's only a tablespoon going on there, so it's not going to end up being a super spicy dip, but it gives it a nice little sort of backdrop of heat. And so you toss the carrots with a tablespoon of this harissa, a little olive oil, a little salt, and some garlic, and you roast it. It's a pretty high heat. It's 450, and the garlic is still in its skins because you don't want it to burn. So you leave these garlic cloves unpeeled, and you roast them until the carrots are super tender. You let them cool. You squeeze those garlic cloves out of the skin into a food processor, and then you scrape in all of the other roasted stuff, the carrots and as much of those little browned, bits from the pan as you possibly can. There's so much flavor there. And then you add white beans, basically a can's worth of white beans. And these can be cannellini beans or navy beans or Great Northern beans, or they could really be chickpeas. Actually, I think you could probably do pinto beans here. And you puree it with a little bit of mint and some lemon juice. And I love mint with spicy food. It's like a little
Me
bit
too.
of cool off the little bit of heat, right? And that's really it. If you want, you can leave some of the beans out and hold some of the beans out and put them back on when you plate it. But you just put it in your bowl, you sort of swirl it around, you add the beans, and you can add a little dollop or two of more harissa if you want. It's this beautiful red color. You drizzle with a little olive oil and you sprinkle with a little more chopped mint, and that is it. It's delicious.
I loved it. And I did do just that. I reserved some of the beans because it's so playful, right? And just use it as a garnish on top.
Right.
And then I added the extra harissa, and my palate, I'm a total wimp, but it's nice to have just that little hint of heat. And the harissa added even, when I added a little more on top, I thought, I actually kind of like it with a little bit more. And harissa, just for people listening, is not like this strange, weird ingredient. Like you'll find it everywhere. And I'm a huge Yotam Ottolenghi fan, as everybody knows. And he uses harissa a lot in his recipes, and I cook from his books a lot. And so it's not anything too weird. And it really does add a beautiful balance to that recipe.
Absolutely.
It was a good one. It didn't last too long because, when you have a 21-year-old in your midst,
that's right.
It's pretty out of control around here. And I only want to go to the supermarket once a week now. So I'm loading up.
Right. Yeah. You must be spending a decent amount on groceries.
Probably not as much. Like it feels that way. I'll go once a week. So it's like, what did I just spend? But I realize I'm the kind of shopper like you were talking about before, where you're like, oh, it's 5:00. I'll just pop by the market. So I really was going several times a week,
right?
Which I am not doing anymore. It's a chore, but it's manageable. Believe me, I am not complaining.
Good.
No way. I'm sort of curious as you come up with recipes. You said you were in Mexico, you were inspired to create a recipe. Do you create recipes based on places you've eaten? Like, how do things pop into Joe's head when it comes to creating a brand new recipe from scratch? Because your book is super creative. I hope everybody gets it. But where do these ideas come from?
Thanks. I think some of them come from this sort of flexibility that we were just talking about, and this sense of, okay, here I am wanting to cook something. What do I have? And what do I have that might go with it? So there are definitely things that come out of that. So things that I wasn't even necessarily intending to write as a recipe, but I just end up realizing, oh, you know what? That was really good. I should probably write that down now. And then, of course, retest it and get it all nailed for the book. So that's one of them. It's like just based on my own instinctive nightly attempts to get dinner on the table, based on what I saw in the market and what I already have at home and my spices and all that. Then absolutely restaurant meals are a huge source of inspiration. So, tasting something and either reaching out to the chef and asking about a specific recipe if they're willing to share, and then trying it out in my own kitchen and, usually, although not always, usually adapting it to be a little bit more home cook friendly because, most of the time chefs are, they just have a different system than we do. And they've got line cooks and they've got purveyors they can just call up, and they've got, ovens that are just on all the time. And so I usually find myself adapting them somewhat. And then sometimes there are, with this book, I would say one of the other things that I was really able to do was just realize that a lot of my favorite recipes that I already make that don't have beans in them could have beans in them. And it's because beans are they can play so many different parts in a recipe, I feel. They're already the only food that the USDA classifies as both a vegetable and a protein. So you've already got that. But they're also pretty starchy. So they can do things in baked goods like the black beans do in those brownies that you make, that actually can replace some of the starch in the recipe, some of the flour in the recipe. They can be a garnish or sort of treated like that, where they're just sort of added. They can be blended into all sorts of purees. Yeah, so there are things that I just knew that I loved already, and I started thinking, can I get some beans into this? Is there a way to do it? I already made this really fabulous roasted tomato and pepper soup that I've made for years. And I was playing around with these wonderful, they're called lady cream peas, and they're a southern sort of in the category of crowder pea or field pea in southern cooking, like a black-eyed pea. And I'd gotten them from this great company, Camellia, in Louisiana. And they're so beautiful. They're these little, almost round, cream-colored peas. And when you cook them, the cooking liquid is virtually clear, which is so interesting. And they just had this really wonderful little kind of nutty, starchy thing going on. And I thought, they kind of remind me of pasta. And so I tried them in that soup, adding them to that soup. And it ended up becoming sort of like tasting like an alphabet soup, like a really nostalgic, with the tomato and the lady peas sort of playing the part of little pasta shapes. So that's an example of how that can sometimes go. Sometimes I go to restaurants and I get ideas, and either I don't ask about it or I don't feel like I need to. It's just something that I feel I can kind of riff off when I get back home. Or sometimes I ask, and in very rare cases, sometimes I ask and am met with hopefully a polite no. So then I think, well, do I want to I can just try to do this myself. And I did that a few times in the book too.
People say no to you. I can't believe it.
I know.
How dare they?
I agree, Liz. I agree.
Not nice. Not nice. We only need nice now in our world. Come on.
Not often. It's not often, thankfully.
Good. So let's say you're, for your mom, listening to this podcast and you're thinking, my kids will not eat beans. This doesn't have to be anything from the book, but what's kind of like a good gateway? Like for me, I think a great gateway bean recipe is hummus.
I was just going to say that.
Oh, I stole it from you.
No, that's okay.
Can you think of what else do you think is a good gateway recipe or preparation with beans?
Well, I would say chilies are good, because they... Like
a beef and bean chili or something like that.
Right. Certainly, if you're an omnivore and you're going to eat everything, like just add beans to your chili. Now, my Texas friends, I'm a Texan.
Oh, are you? I was going to ask where you're from because I was hearing an accent there.
Yeah, I'm from West Texas originally, and all my Texas friends would just find this horrifying to hear me say this. I used to be one of those people who was very purist about Texas chili, no beans, no tomatoes, chili con carne, chilies with meat. That's all it is, people. But, when you turn toward a plant-based diet, you have to give up some of those things, and that was one of them. And I love beans in chili. Of course, I make chili that's all beans now, but yeah, I think that would be a good way to go. Other purees, certainly, maybe pureed soups. I have a recipe for a pasta dish that I think would be a good gateway dish. It's rigatoni e ceci, which is rigatoni with chickpeas, and you turn the chickpeas into a sauce. And I have you puree some of it and leave some of them whole, but you could absolutely puree all of the chickpeas, and it just makes this really delicious sauce with a little rosemary. I think that would be a really good way to go. I'm
going to try that chickpea recipe because I had told you when I had sent you like questions I wanted to ask you. I said, remind me to tell you about this 88-ounce can of chickpeas I have. And you're probably thinking, what is happening with this person?
I would love to see a picture of you holding that.
Oh my gosh.
I want to get a visual
I'm
of
going to do
how
that.
big that actually is.
That's a great idea. I'm going to do that when we hang up, and I'll share it tomorrow on Instagram stories. And here's why, because tomorrow I'm going to post a recipe I made using some of the beans out of that can. But I have a friend named Federica, and she works for a company called Sogno Toscano. And that means Tuscan Dream. And they distribute gourmet specialty Italian foods to restaurants around the country. Well, they've had to pivot, right? Because restaurants are not as, productive as they were months ago.
Right.
So they're now shipping these gourmet groceries directly to consumers. And so she's been sending me stuff, and then I've been ordering stuff, and I'm giving everybody a 15% discount, LizW15. If you go to their website, I'll put it in the show notes, but just as a favor to them, because I really want to help them out. But anyway, so I had ordered a bunch of food, and I was making a couple of recipes. She sends me this, care package, and she puts these giant cans, number 10 cans, these giant cans of beans and tomatoes and artichokes. I was like, oh my God, what am I going to do with all this? So I've got these, I feel like I am a restaurant now. I said, oh my gosh, we can't eat all this. So I'll freeze some of them. But last night I did make a chickpea sauce with, I had just sauteed up some chopped up carrots and garlic. And then I added the some of the canned chickpeas and some of the liquid, and I just let it kind of bubble. And I added fresh thyme, and then I pureed it all, and then I started chucking in all sorts of things like lemon zest and onion flakes and, different things to jazz it up. But then I served this puree with a drizzle of olive oil and a few extra chickpeas as garnish and some thyme. And then I just baked some salmon. So we just put the salmon over this puree. And then I sauteed up some zucchini that I sliced up. It was so good.
That's great.
Super healthy. I feel like I'm eating a lot of beans these days. But yeah, I am up to my eyeballs in beans. But I'm in good shape now because I have between your book and Federica's gifts to me. You don't want to drop that can on your foot. That's all I'm going to say.
Oh, man. No, I guess not. Well, that's fantastic.
It's heavy. Well, the can is officially empty now, but I will have my husband take a picture of me, and I will send it to you, and I will tag you. But you should check them out because they're a great company, and I think you'd probably like their products.
Yeah, I'm sure I would.
But let's wrap it up with dessert, because I do love dessert, and I've been eating more desserts now than ever before, probably because we're home all the time.
Right.
But give us an example of a recipe in the book. Well, they all have beans in it, but what's a favorite dessert recipe? Something easy that families can try.
Well, I would say that probably the easiest one is the mousse, really. Now, this is a chocolate mousse. It's based on Julia Child's really amazing recipe from Mastering the Art of French Cooking, and she put it in several other books. And it's just classic, and it's really great. And it's chocolate. Traditionally, it's chocolate melted with some coffee and some rum. And you whip up egg whites and make a glossy, fabulous meringue with the egg whites and some sugar. And then you fold the two together and you refrigerate it, and you've got this airy, fabulous mousse. Well, it turns out that, your listeners may not know, or maybe you've talked about it before, but you can really do a lot of the same things that you can do with egg whites with aquafaba, the liquid from the can of chickpeas, which you have a lot of access to, don't you?
Yes, I do.
You've got that. So I thought that it was going to be a painstaking process of trial and error to get the aquafaba to work with Julia's chocolate mousse recipe. And it turns out that it pretty much worked the first time. I just had to figure out exactly how much aquafaba, I needed to use. So it's super, super easy. You beat up the chickpea liquid, and it behaves just like those egg whites. You add a little cream of tartar, and it stabilizes them. Once they start coming together, you add sugar. You keep beating; they get super shiny and glossy. You can turn over the bowl, and they're so stiff that they won't come out of the bowl. And then you just gently fold the two together, and the cooled melted chocolate mixture and the aquafaba. and you put it in little ramekins and you refrigerate it, and it actually sets up fairly quickly in a couple of hours. And you've got a vegan chocolate dessert that, believe you me, A, does not seem like it's vegan, and B, no one would guess that you use the liquid from a can of chickpeas in that recipe. It's fantastic. But I have some other things too. I didn't go too crazy with the dessert chapter because I wanted to show some things that beans could do in desserts, but I didn't want to really push it. I know that it's a little bit of a stretch for a lot of people. So I tried to use some familiar things like, the little red azuki beans are renowned and beloved in Asian cooking for their ability to be used in sweets. So I have a red bean ice cream, which is a traditional ice cream that uses those little azuki beans. You can get them out of a can. You can actually find those canned, and you just cook them with a little bit of sugar. You make a little sugar syrup, and you kind of rehydrate, or you add extra sugar liquid to those cooked beans, and they sort of plump up even more. And then you fold some of them into the ice cream, and you serve some of them separately. It's delicious.
That sounds really good.
I also use those same azuki beans in a twist on that bean brownie, kind of like the black bean one that you have. Those black bean brownies, those desserts, that recipe goes back decades. And I feel like, you tell me if you remember this too, I feel like when I first saw those, they were always these incredible shortcut recipes that use just a can of black beans and a box of brownie mix.
Oh, I would never use a box of brownie mix. No, I'm a little snobby. I will use a Trader Joe's. I'm not going to lie. I do love the triple truffle or something Trader Joe's has, but I tend to prefer the scratch.
Agreed. And I feel like that was where I first saw that black bean brownie idea. But I thought, people have made them so much better, including yours, I'm sure, since those days, making them from scratch, using better chocolate, etc. But I thought, well, wouldn't they be great with those little azuki beans, which play so well in sweets? So I use those there, and I add some Middle Eastern touches with a little rose water and dried rose petals on the top, and a little, some pistachios. And those are pretty fantastic.
Maybe when we come out of quarantine, I'll make that, because we've got some Armenian markets not too far in Belmont, Massachusetts. And my good friend Nairi is Armenian, and she has all this stuff at home. So maybe that'll be my celebration of freedom. Maybe I'll make that recipe. Hold me to it, please, because I really do want to do that. That sounds yummy. And the aquafaba recipe, I think I pretty much have everything for that one. Maybe we'll make that one this week, because, I've got a lot of the chickpea liquid, and it needs a home.
Cool. And, you can top them with whatever you want. You can eat the mousse alone, but you can also just put, raspberries or other berries on there, little walnuts or other nuts if you want to sprinkle on top, whatever you like.
That sounds great. Well, what a sweet ending to the podcast. I cannot thank you enough. And I could really talk to you. This should have been like a 5-part series, because I love beans, maybe not as much as you, but I do love beans, and I just love their versatility. And at a time like this, we definitely could use your recipes. So thank you. Where can people find you on social media? I know you're very active on Instagram, but give us your handles.
Yeah, so I make it really easy for people. My handles are all just Joe Yonan. So it's Joe Yonan on Instagram. It's Joe Yonan on Twitter. It's Joe Yonan, obviously, on Facebook. And my website is joeyonan.com.
Wow, what a branding genius you are. Well, thank you, Joe. Thank you so much. And good luck with everything with the paper and the book.
Thank you, Liz. And thanks so much for having me. It's been really fun.
Great. Good stuff. Well, and thanks to my listeners too, by the way, for hanging with us. This was a really fun, almost hour conversation. I got lots of fresh new ideas, and I'm going to post the Harissa carrot white bean dip recipe to the blog. I'm pretty sure I got permission to do that. And anything else that I make from Joe's book, I'll share it on Instagram. So be sure to follow me there. If you love the podcast, post a review on iTunes, Stitcher Radio, wherever you get your podcasts. And as always, thanks for listening to Liz's Healthy Table.